Ellen Gottesdiener, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us on Agility Chats. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me, John. I love your chats. It's just such a great service to the community. There's so much to learn in all these sessions that you do.
Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying bringing people on who break my brain. And so let's see if we
Well,
can break some other people's brains too.
I don't want to be breaking anybody's brain.
In a good way, in a good way. Ellen, I met you at certified less training, Basfada in not San Francisco, sorry, California. Was it Santa Clara, San Jose? I can't remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Santa
yeah.
Clara with Boss. Yes.
And I was sitting at the same table as you, and I was kicking myself because I didn't know about your work, and it's like, because you're so understated, you've got so much behind you, and I think I'd like the audience to understand a little, well, not literally, but I'd like you to just explain your professional background, if you would mind, Ellen, including the organizations you're involved in as well, from an agile and product management point of view.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I started my career as a analyst programmer in the insurance space, life insurance and health insurance, and did project management, and then fell into product management for a healthcare application, and then one of the things that happened personally is we moved out. I'm from the U.S., from Connecticut, which is actually where I'm now. After going out to the Midwest, I left my role at that organization and I started doing my own thing. Initially doing some subcontract work, but I found myself working a lot with organizations around defining what their product requirements were going to be and getting them all on the same page. Here in the background, my neighborhood, somebody's backing up. You can hear. And I ended up working with a lot of different organizations. From financial services, a lot of pharmaceutical, some hospitality, and so forth. And this sort of led me, what I found I was doing a lot was helping people figure out together to understand what are their shared goals and what is it that we think we want to deliver. So that led me to doing a lot of professional facilitation work. And I, early on in my career, got very engaged in the idea of collaboration and collaborative workshops. In fact, back when I was working at that insurance company, as a product manager, I was pulling together a product for internal use, and I brought on board two guys. We used to call them Frick and Frack because they always did this thing together. And they had been trained in what's called JAD, Joint Application Design, which is sort of like, when you say I want a Kleenex, a tissue, it's the same thing. But Joint Application Design grew initially out of IBM. They had their training from them. And they were really great at helping people come together and collaborate really well. And I had in this product some conflict going on, and I brought them in. They were an internal resource. And I was just amazed at how they pulled everyone together, got things on the wall, and I thought, I want to do that, right? So this was a for me, and as a product leader, that was a seed for me on how useful that was, and how bringing out conflict was actually a positive thing, because conflict is energy, right? You want to direct it appropriately. Yeah. So I just like had that seed in my mind. So fast forward, when I'm out on my own working with a lot of organizations, I was drawing on that, and I connected with people in the professional facilitation community. There's a global group called the International Association of Facilitators. And I started attending those and met a number of people, a few people in the software space, Jean Tabeka being one. She and I go way back from our IAF roots, actually. So I started doing a lot of these sessions for what were high-tech products. And that experience led to writing the first book that I wrote, Requirements by Collaboration.
This one.
Yeah, that's it. Right, requirements by collaboration. And that was 2002, my goodness. And I'll tell you that the frameworks, the structure for collaboration works regardless of what you're doing. You could be doing a strategy, a roadmap, a release plan, you could be doing product discovery. Those elements, and actually I'm writing a blog, working on a blog right now to put a canvas, a workshop design canvas out there for people to use with some tips. That stuff is still, it just stands the test of time. It's based and stands on the shoulders of really good facilitation practices that have been around for literally hundreds of years. Anyway, so I started working more and more in that area, and then this thing called Agile came about, where it became a buzzword. But a couple of years before the manifesto, one of the organizations, happened to be a pharmaceutical I was working with, was experimenting with iterative and incremental development. And I was working on that team sort of as a process coach, you could call me. We were experimenting with that, working in that way. And this is a highly regulated product. It was keeping track of clinical trials, protocol information. You can't get that wrong. That was one of my initial roots in what's now called Agile, and doing work in the Agile space. So, so fast forward, just continuing in that arena.
Yeah. Is that where your attention to detail came from? Because in the most recent book, Discover to Deliver with Mary Gorman, I really noticed the unbelievable attention to detail. Did that come from your background in, the pharma sector, healthcare sector, where you had to make sure that whatever you were doing was validated according to the FDA guidelines and all that kind of stuff? Is that where it came from?
Well, yes and no. I think I can be, as a human being, a bit anal retentive.
Okay.
So, and have a strong business analysis background. So, and trying to look at things holistically. Myers-Briggs, the Myers-Briggs type indicator has the second dimension, if you will, of Myers-Briggs is whether you see the world in small pieces, the sensor, or the big picture person, and I'm the big picture person. So the little details I can miss, but I can pick on those, and I look for the connections between those. So that's, I guess maybe that's it, but experience in pharma certainly points to that need to be able to verify as well as validate.
I'm going to ask you later on about Mary Gorman, the co-author for the book, in terms of how maybe she gave you balance, because you mentioned two different Myers-Briggs categories or whatever. But I'd like to kind of stay with yourself for those. So you kind of reinvented a couple of times. You were a business analyst. You then kind of watched Frick and Frack, and you got involved with Jean Tobacco, fantastic professional facilitator and coach. Unfortunately, she died a few years ago, didn't she? And so you kind of, I guess you either learned from the best or you worked with the best. So which was it, do you think, in terms of?
Am I working?
Yeah, were you, in terms of learning the facilitation skills? Yeah.
Actually, I would say in terms of the facilitation skills, my mentors in that space are people that aren't even known in the software community. Okay. And because what I observed was these people that I was learning from were doing facilitation in businesses, not-for-profits. So I took a lot of training from some of those folks and applied it into, technology product space. So, you have giants, if you will, in the facilitation space, like Ingrid Benz and Roger Schwartz. Where Ingrid comes, from a very practical approach on the foundations of facilitation and Roger's work. Roger, studied. He was a graduate student at Harvard, and he studied on the same folks that people know, Edgar Schein, and his approach, the skilled facilitator, the ladder of inference, and the mutual learning approach is incredibly powerful. It has a lot. I've done additional trainings with Roger. That has had a large influence on me in many different ways. That has nothing to do with product per se.
Got it. Yeah. So you built up that coat of armor in terms of facilitation skills, and then you kind of maybe pivoted a little bit towards agility. Just kind of captured your skills you already had, and then I guess applied this new agile knowledge, new skills, and kind of went in that area. First of all,
they were actually happening at the same time, because I found that facilitation skills were necessary to get people on the same page and to be able to collaborate well, regardless of what method. I mean, if you look at just a little piece of history here in terms of the why facilitation or how facilitation took off in the Agile community. If you look at one of the grandmother Agile methods, aside from Tom Gilb's approach, you have DSDM in the UK, Dynamic System Development Methodology.
Yeah.
And one of the principles in DSDM is a collaborating team. So when they were training people, DSDM training people to work in the Agile space, they were doing facilitation and collaboration training, to the point where they had an actual developed a facilitation accreditation services, and FAS was called in the UK, and which was later picked up. This was for DSDM, and this was later picked up by the International Association of Facilitators as a framework for that accreditation.
Oh.
So the accreditation that's used globally for skilled facilitators through the International Association of Facilitators, iafworld.org, is based on the facilitation accreditation for DSDM. So,
did know that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Together.
So you got into the Agile space, and then there's the product piece. So how did they connect? And for you, or what happened?
It was the product stuff first, and then the way of working iteratively and incrementally was the sensible thing to do. So, it became, we didn't even call it Agile at the time, back in the late 90s, and that project that I was telling you about, where we built at this pharma a product that was used in the US and in Singapore for clinical trial tracking. That term wasn't even around. A couple of years later, the manifesto came out. So, we were working with a whole team together. The customer was a team member. She was a nurse, and she understood how protocols work, and was trying all the things that we were building was being tried out immediately. We had, we were testing as much as we could. We certainly didn't do full XP. I mean, I learned about how we could do things much better. And one of the things subtly that has nothing to do with product, but everything to do with a product, that I fell into doing was these short retrospectives as we were going. Instead of waiting to the end, we would just do these little mini retros. And then, of course, we did an end of delivery retro. And that ended up being incredibly important. And I ended up writing a little case about that and attended the first retrospective facilitator gathering. I think it was I have to check the year. It might have been in 2001 or 2 was the first gathering that Norm Kurth was at, who wrote Project Retrospectives, a handbook for team reviews. Yeah.
Was Esther Darby there as well?
Was who?
Esther Darby?
Esther was there, Diana was there, or oh god, there were a lot of great people there. The originators of the user story canonical format, Tim McKinnon and hello, I'll get her name in a second.
Rachel Davies.
Rachel was there, right? Tim and Rachel were both there.
Yeah.
Ainsley Nees was there. Three, anybody knows Three was there. He's since passed away. Yeah, it was really awesome. Those early years were very. There was a lot of energy, a lot of things happened, and that's actually the source of where what we call iteration retrospectives came about. We were using open space, and it was the second year, not the first. So in the open space session, I proposed a session on retros with the question, why are we waiting to the end of the project to do them? Why don't we do them along the way? Because I had been doing that in that experiment, sort of experimentally that year before, and everybody ended up coming to that session, and then we gave birth to, we called them heartbeat retros, right? Milestone, heartbeat, and special. Special being one example was we had somebody who was attending who was from the US Coast Guard. And every time they have a spill, they do a retrospective, like an oil spill, which had happened actually recently. So just like when firefighters do it after those events. So we had sort of a meta model. I actually still have the diagram because I was the recorder for that session. And that gave birth to, and I believe, if I understand it correctly, Ed Esther went back to Ken and Scrum, and said, and then brought this idea, and it then became part of Scrum. So, yeah. So say what?
Lots of energy in the early days is really with all the key lighting, leading lighting.
Yeah.
And so how did you get involved then with Agile Alliance? Were you involved in Agile Alliance?
Well, I ended up going to the conferences, actually beginning with the very first one.
Yeah.
I think I've been to every one but one. 2 years ago, I didn't make it. And I've spoken at most of them, or else I was a track chair or reviewer, whatever. So that was my initial involvement. And then, I don't know, maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago, there was an initiative that I said I rose my hand to pick up on Agile product management. And it had originally been on Agile business analysis, which I felt was too narrow. And so I'm the initiative chair for that Agile product management initiative. And we started a couple of chapters, so to speak, where we do use open space for all our events, and we have a annual Agile Product Open event in Boston, Toronto, and Johannesburg. So that's through the Agile Alliance. So I've been co-chairing the Boston chapter of that APO as well.
Cool.
So
I want to some of the comments, Aaron, if you don't mind. First of all, hi Ross, thank you for saying hi. Hi Daniel. And Le Sprinkler, hi Le Sprinkler. And Daniel Dwaron, he's from Tenflow. He's asking, iterations or time boxing?
I'm not sure. Usually those are interchangeable. I'm not sure if that's in reference to something that I mentioned before. Sprint retro, maybe, or I'm not sure.
Maybe just send us a clarifying question and we'll try to address it. Or you can, if you want to join on camera, we have you.
Yeah, other mugs here aside from ours.
So Daniel's followed through now. He's okay. So Hirotaka Takeuchi and I can't pronounce this. Ikujiro Nanaka, a source of inspiration of Scrum, never meant time boxing. And then there's a continuation. Sorry.
Okay.
A lot of people are wrong, especially Jeff Sutherland. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, it's just XP got it right. No time boxing.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Daniel. But I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with them. In general, I think, and actually, just on your book, and to kind of have addressed Daniel's comments, I did notice you referring to traditional versus, I think it was time boxing versus flow or something like that. Is that right? And I think
Yeah.
what you meant was they're either doing something like waterfall, or they're doing something like a sprint or iteration, whatever you want to call it, or
Right.
there's flow. So to Daniel's point, in Ellen's work, she talks about flow as well, and actually how we talk about structured conversations and how they get in, well, basically where they come about when you're using flow as in tame flow, or if you're using something like, for example, Scrum or some other approach that has some kind of rhythm, some cycle or whatever.
Yeah.
So, hey, Daniel, when we get to talk about that, hopefully that will help there. Okay, so I just want to bring something to people's attention as well. So the book, Discover to Deliver, was written by Ellen and Mary Gorman, and you can actually download it for free. And it's discovertodeliver.com, discovertodeliver.com, and then there's a download link, and you go in there. I used a business email that was attached to Google. It didn't work for me. When I used a different business email account, it worked. And then the password is whatever email you gave. That's the password to open the book. So I will be referring to specific pages in the book. And so if you want, you can follow us. And we'll try to bring them up on screen as we go along. So feel free to check that out.
Yeah, this is a physical book, but we decided to after 3 print runs to no longer produce the physical book and to make a PDF available to the world. So please do take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I'll probably put that into the video, the YouTube footage as well, in the comments or on the description of this talk. We'll make sure all the links are in there for everybody who's watching the recording later on. So I wanted to ask you, Ellen, about Mary Gorman, because you wrote the book with Mary.
Right.
So can you tell us some more about her? And
yes, Mary is happily retired, So she's, I think it's been 3 years, maybe even 4, at least 3, maybe 3 or 4 years. And we worked together for many years. Mary has a very strong business analysis background, and she is where I was the more bigger picture. You know, you're talking about attention to detail. Mary was extremely attentive to detail. So we would sometimes drive each other crazy in that way. And writing a book with somebody else is quite an adventure for anybody who's ever done that. So I know there are some people that have. It can be very challenging. And we experiment with all kinds of patterns in working together. I mean, and we would write pieces when we were on client engagements. You know, I'm based in the U.S. We'd be over in Europe, and working in the hotel room was kind of sad. And then in between, go out to a museum or whatever. One of the interesting things that we did with Mary is sometimes we would go to my house or sometimes to her house, and she's in South Carolina in the U.S., and we would clear pictures off the walls. Her husband is a fabulous artist, and there were a lot of his paintings around. But with his permission, we take them down, and we would print out what we had written, and we put the book around the wall, and then read it and find gaps in it. And there are pictures she occasionally to make fun of me because she's very tall and I'm short. I'm 5'1", and she has pictures of me standing on a stepladder reading parts of the book because I couldn't reach it where she could easily reach it. But I told that approach, I shared that approach with Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin, who have co-authored books, and they tried that on their second co-authored book and loved that approach. put the book on the wall. So that was a really fun thing to do.
Some tidy up to do after that session. So how long would you kind of go into a stint like for like a few days of doing that, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We would do things like we would do Pomodoros. We tried co-writing from a distance. We did all kinds of experiments to try to learn how to write well together and draw on each other's strengths.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Patrick Lencioni in his podcast, he says that what he does is he goes to a hotel to write. He just to go into a zone. I guess, you do need to be in some kind of an environment where you can just focus. I guess it's not something you do between dinner and putting stuff into the dishwasher, is it? It's like
No, you need blocks of time to focus for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for that. Thank you, and I hope Mary has a lovely retirement.
Thanks for asking about her.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to get into the book itself, and the most basic question is what is a product? Because people get confused about that. I think I saw on your blogs you got some people have like a narrow view and inside as outside, as inside out, and
inside out versus outside in.
Yeah. So maybe we'll talk more about the perspectives in that blog maybe later on. But for the people watching, what's your explanation of what a product is?
Well, actually wrote up a very short definition, and I don't have it memorized, but essentially a product is something that provides value to customers and business partners. And it can be something physical, something tangible, or something intangible. And it could be a service. So it could be a device, software, a service, or a combination. And ideally, you define the product as broadly as possible. And this is something that I admire in Les, that us and Craig have pushed people's thinking to think as broadly as possible about what a product is. And I found over the last maybe 4-ish years that was actually a focus area in working with clients a lot, was just getting a clarity around what the product was or was not. You know, the teams, the whole organization is sometimes structured around a poor definition of product, and that causes all kinds of problems and a proliferation of backlogs and conflict and wrong measures. So this is a really important topic that does not have enough focus, I think, in many organizations, I should say.
And it's where a lot of organizations go wrong at the very start, isn't it? It's there's so much. It feels so more efficient. You know, why wouldn't I? If I got 4 teams and I know the work is going to team 3 anyway, why wouldn't they just move it into their backlog? You know, because I know it's going there anyway.
Right.
It's like the road to perdition, isn't it? It's like they're stuck with it now. We got no flexibility for it to go back to team 2. You know, they don't know anything about that working.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like that's our natural bias. We think of efficiency over effectiveness, you know, the idea of local optimization versus global optimization. And it's sometimes hard to get your head wrapped around. You know, we're finding that in defining the product and working with leaders, and we talked about this in the blog that Toby Sinclair and I recently published, that that was something that we needed to get leaders to really experience what it means to define their product and define it broadly.
I just flashed that up there actually, because that's where you talk about narrow outside in versus broad inside out. This is actually a case study, is it?
Yeah. Toby and I wrote this case study, published it. That's a blog that points to it. This blog talks about my experience in writing the case study with Toby, which was really educational for both of us. And yeah, that mindset shift was something that was really important and continues to be important for a lot of organizations. Outside in versus inside out thinking.
Yeah, and there's a reference there to all the things that you did, like an emotional seismograph, and I was like, "What the hell is that?" But I'm guessing it's some kind of fancy mad sad lad or something, is it? Where you kind of...
No, it's actually very simple. It's a timeline. It's like when you do a retro and you have a timeline. There's many creative ways to do a timeline. But then what you do is either below it. When I do this physical, I like physically when we can be co-located in the pre-COVID days. Give people a marker where they would mark where this was a high point, a low point. So you get the seismographs, similar to what UX designers and CX designers will do with a journey map. Okay, where the experience is good, where the experience is bad. Alternatively, what you can do is you can use icons like happy faces or sad faces around those events, and you get a pattern over time of where things were going well and not so well, and then you can explore, well, why, what was happening in the community at that point in time.
And there's a reference to causal loop diagrams, and there's an example of one here. I've tried to people. I might just put it on full screen so people can actually see it. Just make it a little bit bigger. Can you talk us through this? I mean, basically with a causal loop diagram, you put your variables on the board. You try to figure out the links between them and all that kind of stuff. But what's the story behind this?
Well, the point of this organization seeking to become product centric was what you see on the right and the left that are starred, the goal being to reduce delivery time on the left side, and the other goal to increase customer value. And so these Post-its represent factors or variables that were at play that influenced in a positive or increasing, I should say, or decreasing manner how those variables ultimately influence those things. So if you look just right at the center, this organization is an infrastructure organization, and so that was like a really powerful variable where it says, for example, in bigger letters, technology solution bias right above where you're pointing there. Yeah, right there. So if you have that bias, which this organization have, that tended to decrease the time they spent with the customer because they were thinking inside out. They were thinking from a technology point of view. And that in turn, by reducing time with the customer, the influence toward aligning the definition with value, time with customer does help you with that alignment. But that bias was reducing their desire to have time with the customers. So just taking that little corner over there, you're looking at how the factors influence your ultimate goal. So down, let's look at on the left side where we have the delivery time being the goal. And let's just look at to the very right, the number of product dependencies. So with the more dependencies you have, that's going to increase your delivery time. So, and you get more dependencies, by the way, when you have a lot of backlogs and you have a product broken down into technology parts. Yeah. So it's a really powerful way to look holistically at all the variables at play that might not, intuitively come out as being influences in the opposite direction that you would want. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I'm curious what you did to work around it. How did you manage to kind of circumvent these concerns, I guess?
Oh, wow. Well, then we talk about this in much more detail in the experience report. But one of the things that we tried to do early on was get people to understand what their product was more holistically from the outside in. So instead of thinking of a product like an infrastructure product is, I'm going to build this little piece that then serves another area within the infrastructure, which serves another area. Well, wait a minute. Let's think of the external customer. The customer could be somebody within the firm. Is a very large firm. It could be 300,000 people. If we're talking about some of the collaboration tools that people use, or it could be something that is used by the true external customer. So we want to have people think, who is the real customer, not your immediate customer in how your org structure is set up, right? Or how somebody, acquires an infrastructure service. So that was one of the big things that we did. We ran product definition workshops, and also within many of those workshops looked at how would you redesign the organization so that the structure of the organization follows how you define the product more holistically, instead of having the product defined according to how you created this org structure, which is a false org structure, which has many holes in it. So that was one of the things that we did, as well as coaching and training and coaching coaches, trying to influence the product managers to rethink their metrics and be more customer-centric and think more holistically about the product. And that's where the product canvas tool, we made use of a version of that inside that organization. The product canvas helps you define the product, and it helps a product team think more broadly about the product in the context of its market and how you get to people, and then how the product is defined. So those were some of the tools that we used. There was a lot of work that was going on in the background. Toby being more involved in that part, but around the job titles and roles. And that turned out quite messy. And they went back and forth in terms of job titles and roles. That's another mess in our industry, product owner versus product manager.
Absolutely. I chose a different title altogether, just dodged it completely. Because it was
how did you do that?
Just use a completely different role, and everybody was asking, where's the product owner? I want to be a product owner. And it was a problem because people perceived product owners having power, and everybody wanted to be one. So it's like just got rid of the problem. So
yeah, I mean, that's interesting because at first at this particular organization, they thought product owners were not powerful. And then they understood product management, confused that with the Scrum definition of product ownership, and then everybody wanted to be a product manager. So it got very, 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 a lot of confusion. I've tended to just use product person to try to keep it neutral and not get into these naming title wars.
Yeah, I'll protect the innocent. I won't say what we called it, but basically it was effectively a product manager, but we just kind of avoided that language because it was just overloaded and it was problematic.
It is overloaded, John. It's really.
I'll be thrown out of Scrum.org after saying that, but it's okay.
No, it did come from there, and with a lot of misunderstanding. If you look at the Scrum Guide, it talks about the product owner role being responsible for the value of the product. Well, that is a pretty loaded phrase, but there's nothing else in the Scrum Guide about strategy. There's nothing. What does that mean, the value of the product? That implies what we call today modern product management. At the time it was written, that wasn't as much of a discipline. So that's led to a lot of confusion, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that actually because we've managed to go into a tangent, which is really interesting. We should talk about that a bit more, but there's a few comments. I just want to address them, Ellen, if that's okay.
Sure.
Let's have a look here. So Russ is saying very generous of you, Ellen. I think that's to do with the book, because the book is available for free at discover2deliver.com. Go to the download link, put in a business email, and the password is your business email, and you will have the book. And so I'll be referring to some of those pages. So please check that out. And so Daniel's been in good form this evening. So book co-writing the book, right, with Mary, because Daniel co-wrote a book as well.
Ah, there you go, Daniel. So you know the pains and glory of that.
So what he's wondering is, did you get on each other's nerves?
Oh yes, oh yes.
Yeah.
I can answer that very quickly. Yes, it was sort of a love hate, not hate, but it was for sure. But it was definitely a great adventure.
There were lots of what's the word? Crucial conversations, I guess.
Yes.
You weren't afraid to have them.
Yes. We had the wonderful. I'm so grateful to our editor. So we had an editor, copy editor, who I had worked with on my first book, and she's now retired from copy editing, and she's actually wrote a novel, and her name is Betsy, and Betsy was edited as we went. So there were times where we were in that, as Daniel was saying, getting on your nerves, or like it's enough is enough. Let's see, Betsy, I would call Betsy like the magical fairy lady, because she could take our crappy text and, just do this like beautiful thing to help smooth it out, or ask a question about it that would be like, we didn't write that, we didn't intend that way. So I can't say enough about the value of a great copy editor. Oh my, what a gift. She was just fabulous.
It's a pity she's retired. A few more comments from Le Sprinkler. I'm really curious, Le Sprinkler, why you call yourself Le Sprinkler.
Is that the Sprinkler? I guess that's his icon, right? His or her icon.
Yeah. So did David Hussman's Agile product design serve as an inspiration to you, Ellen?
Of course, I knew David very well. Wonderful human being. I think we were doing things in parallel, and we've attended each other. We had attended sessions that each other did. And I buy the Agile product design stuff. Maybe Le Sprinkler is discussing David's use of story maps, and I'm not sure exactly what particular approach he's referring to, but I guess yes. That because there were elements to David's work that I've drawn on, as well as from Jeff Patton, and David and Jeff knew each other very, very well. So sure, David very much.
I did notice at the very start of your book, you kind of had almost a health warning saying, we're not explaining X, Y, Z, A, B, C. You can find that out somewhere else.
Right.
So you see more about story mapping, and the you did refer to it, all right, but you kind of left it because I guess Jeff wrote a book on that, so you said, yeah.
Exactly. Yes, and he wrote a great book on story mapping.
Yeah, it was funny. I remember I couldn't figure out how he could write a whole book in it, but by the time I finished it, I was, okay, he could actually write a whole book in it. It was really nice. 2016, I think it came out. Daniel's back. I think Daniel is complimenting the illustrations in your book.
Yes, thank you. Now speak about a co-author, Daniel. A lot of the engineering of the illustrations is Mary, because Mary is a very artistic person as well, married to an artist, but she was very much into the physical design of the book. So we even had things where it's hard to see, but the way the binding is set up, that you could open it up and it would lie flat. Okay, which you couldn't do when we went to some other publishers. They wouldn't do that kind of a binding. And that's right. The glue. It's a gluing thing. Or the way that in the physical book, and you can see it in the PDF.
Yeah, it's like the tube map across the top, the subway map.
Yeah, it's like a subway map, so you can know where you are in the book. And those little sort of artistic elements were very much Mary's doing. So
Cool.
Thank you.
The sprinkler has come back. You have to. Maybe you're going to keep the mystery of the sprinkler, but thank you for the answer.
There's a story there that we would all like to know about that sprinkler.
I know Angela well, so talking about changing the organization can be very scary, especially for the middle management. So, what do you think about that, Ellen?
Oh, I totally agree. I think that they call it the black hole of change. That middle level of people that typically would think, where do I fit in the organization? And change management is like an oxymoron, right?
Yeah.
You can't really manage change. I think some of this fear is well founded, because what happens to me, what happens to my role, how do I fit into the bigger pictures of things when I'm overseeing work that may actually not be valued in the future? What is valued in the future? How will the organization support me, or what can I do that is valuable in the organization? So I think it behooves organizations, middle, large in particular, to address how are we going to help people if we are changing structures, find where their talents can be used, do retraining. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to lose their jobs, but they may have different roles that they have to play or could play to the betterment of the organization's goals. So
essentially it's about fixing problems, isn't it? The role kind of changes to fixing problems and really seeing the problems as well.
Yes, exactly. Being coaches, right? So giving those people coaching skills is really important versus managing in the traditional sense of managing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did you like encourage the middle managers to do like professional coaching, skill acquirement, like ICF and all that type of stuff? I'm just curious. Or was it more, when you were working with middle managers and you were trying to develop them as coaches, did you kind of send them to ICF kind of training and stuff like that, or was it more like basic, professional coaching skills, like open questions?
I don't particularly look to one or the other, coaching organizations. There's a number of them that I would take a look and see what, I'm not religious in terms of those. Those coaching skill organizations, all this stuff has been around for a long time. It's really not new stuff. So it's what flavor of coaching and what the experience that you can get and the coaching of the coaching is what's important. And I think people do need to be in the coaching space, need to be well run, well read, well run as well. I think sometimes some of us in the coaching world might get into coaching because it's sort of like some people would try to become a therapist or a psychologist to fix thyself. And you've got to have your act together first in order to do that other work. So that's why in many coaching programs, coaching and therapy programs, the therapist / coach needs to go through their own coaching, right? And become very, very self-aware, because you can fall into your own pits and not be, your lack of self-transparency can then project into your work. So I think we all need to be very cognizant of that.
Yeah, we all need coaches, really, don't we? It's a good little reset button for me. Thank you for that, Ellen. Daniel has come back as well. a bit of a Kanban twist. How far deep in your product backlog, becoming speculative work, have you drawn a frontier? Trying to understand the question.
Me too. I'm not.
I think what Daniel is trying to say is how much exploratory work would there be in discovery work would there be versus delivery work in your backlog? At least that's how I'm understanding the question. But I don't think there's any magic answer to that. It really depends on what you're doing. And if the product is up and running for a few years, or if you're just doing something new, you don't even know if you got the right personas. It kind of depends on the context, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I would put this, I guess I would frame this in the context of structured conversations and looking at options, and then deciding based on value which of those options that is speculative, it might be worthwhile at what point in time, to explore and do some experiments around. So I'm not sure otherwise how to interpret the.
Yeah, thank you. And the sprinkler has identified as Eric Gourmet. So,
all right,
Eric. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you so much for identifying yourself. Appreciate that. And Russ has come back, offering very good rates for coaching supervision.
Okay.
That's the problem with me, Russ, is I'm slightly insane. So, like, am I even coachable? But you can give it a go, I guess, right? All right. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the kind of agenda, if you like, and just kind of drill in a little bit more, because one of the things I noticed about your book was you didn't talk about stakeholders so much. You talked more about partners. Okay. So I'm just going to share on screen what I mean by that. Just go full view as well so people can actually see it. Just make it a little bit bigger for people as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, Ellen?
Yeah. I think we I don't like that term stakeholders. When you think of stakeholders, you think of sort of well, aside from steak as forget about eating steak, but you could think about putting a stake in the ground, or you think about putting a stake in a vampire's heart as a way to kill them. You know, the term stakeholder is a little off-putting. When we really think about it, there are product partners. We have these partners from these three different domains or realms, from the customer, from the business, and the technology. And we need to understand who they are in those different realms. And they could cross over. So somebody that is in the business realm, that might be a buyer, right? You could have a user and a chooser, and a user being somebody that uses the product. That's a customer. That also may be the buyer, but they may not necessarily be a customer, right? So a single partner could fall into multiple realms. But we need to understand holistically who all these are, because what they value may be different. And not everybody's value is created equal at any given point in time. But when we understand all three of these partners, that tells us how to go about, or who to engage in the discovery process, who to engage in validation of the product, and not forget anybody. A very simple example that comes to mind with an organization, healthcare organizations that I worked with some years ago, and they went out and built a capability of their product very much in mind with the customer, the user customer. But they did not think about the business partner being the buyer, who was the head of the healthcare organization from different regions. And when they went out to say, hey, here's what we created for your users, for patients or members, and that had this wonderful functionality, the head of the healthcare company started asking questions that he wanted to get answers to, higher level utilization questions. And they couldn't answer those questions because they didn't think about the buyer. And they didn't think about the buyer as a user. They thought about the true end user, which was good. This is CX, UX having a strong play, but without thinking about that buyer and what questions he may ask. Because then he literally said, well, that looks great, but it doesn't give me what I want also. And they ended up having that experience several times, and it was a multi-million-dollar fiasco for this organization for recovering from that. And it would have been a simple matter of, like the way we do it in a discovery session, is putting those three partners, up on a wall or a mural or whatever, a Miro, whatever you're using, and talking about some examples and having people list those, clarify those, and then we can then have conversations about what they value, right? What their value considerations are and so forth. So, and how do we involve them in the discovery and delivery process? So it's not, short period of time with a lot of payback.
So just on value, you spend a bit of time in the book explaining value. Can you actually, page 252 in particular for anybody who's downloaded the book, but can you kind of give us the quick dummy's guide to what your perspective is on value when people are talking about optimizing value, getting the most value? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, because it's a question that I'm afraid many teams and organizations and product teams don't make as clear as they could. And the Agile community, to some extent, is guilty on promoting value without being clear on what value is. We are into value, we deliver value. Well, what does that really mean, and whose value is it? Value is fair return in goods, services, or money for something exchanged. So it's what you get for what you give up. And it doesn't always have to be about money, right? Yeah. For a business, oftentimes it is. It is about return on investment, but it also could be brand projection. It could be first to market. And a user's value, they may be value convenience or trust because they're giving you your product, or being able to complete a task quickly, or being a member of a group, right? And from the technology perspective, value is being able to, is often related, by the way, to quality attributes in the product, being able to scale the product, being able to have security, being able to support it without getting called at 3 a.m, which I remember having that experience as a programmer back in the day. So it sort of matches to the idea of those three partners, John, because we talk about the customer, business, and technology. At its essence, when you think about value from a business point of view, value is a product that's viable. From a user point of view, a product needs to be desirable. And that might be a combination of usability and usefulness, right? Yeah. But desirable at its essence. And then when you think about the technology partner, it's got to be feasible. So you have this viability, desirability, feasibility, and they can sometimes compete with each other. Yeah. Which is why the product work, and whether you call them a product owner, product manager, product champion, product person, is so challenging, because you have to balance those different perspectives of value. You have to align what is the most important thing to do next based on the strategy of the organization and the product. So it's really hard to make decisions sometimes, but obviously important. Decision making is an important part of product work. So I think what we want to do is explore using those partners as a launching pad. What is value for those different partners? And that will help us make better decisions.
That sounds really good. It's similar to my own lens as well. I talk about customer value, end user value. I have a different description too, because you customer captures who's paying and who's using in your description, which is fine. It's kind of, and then I talk about knowledge value, which is acquiring knowledge about whether something is feasible technically, or whether there's even value there from a discovery point of view. Because for me, a lot of the value in discovery is finding out stuff you shouldn't even build. Do some experiments, right? And then I talked to, and then the new thing I added in was, well, the last 2 years was sustainable development goal value. So maybe if there's something you need to do in your company about, leave the world not in a worse place. Let's put it that way. So whatever product or service you're offering. So sounds like we're kind of aligned with just kind of slightly different language, talking about the same things.
Yeah.
It is important, isn't it? Because like I do these product owner classes with Scrum.org or whatever, and I love the classes. They're fantastic, and I love the audiences come along. And so we talk about optimizing value all the. So I ask you, what is value? And thank all the trainers, to be fair, but it's an important question.
It is an incredibly important question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're all talking about it. Like, what is it?
You have to make it very explicit and very clear. If you ask people independently before having this conversation as a community, they'll all have slightly different ideas of what that is, and that means we're not aligned. Wow, that's going to cause all kinds of problems. So it's a very important conversation to have early on in whatever stage your product is in its life cycle.
So we've got a few more comments. Thank you for the level of engagement, everyone, for who's been helping. So Rossi's put up the price because I'm insane and I'm Irish. So yeah, you're probably right, Rob. Yeah.
He's coming back to the coach, right? That's what that.
Yeah, it'd be hard work. Yeah, exactly. The sprinkler, Eric says he likes partners. Yeah, me too.
Great.
Yeah. Daniel, the biggest value comes when you decide to drop and not exercise an option. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. What you don't do. Well put.
And there's so many companies in what I call project land where they're not quite yet at product land yet. They're delivering projects and so on, and they're trying to be efficient and so on. And so trying to get those organizations to limit work in progress is really difficult. And so one of the things I love about discovery is that it just comes for free because we discover something we shouldn't do. Fantastic. You slack in our system.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not that great.
That is a hard mental shift for people that came up through the project management space and are not product aware.
Yeah.
Big time. Yes.
Yeah.
And I like that Daniel mentioned option because I think of those as I think the backlog is basically a holding place for product options. Yeah. And you do not have to exercise all of those options.
Yeah.
You need to use value as a criteria for deciding which and when and if to go forward with any of those options.
So there's a love affair going on between the sprinkler and Daniel, I think, on the chat. So Daniel, you mean like simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential principle, and Daniel said, yep. So, and Daniel, what do I do now, later, or never? Never is cool and seldom managed.
Right.
I have to think about that one.
And so, seldom managed, never being seldom managed. You don't need to manage.
You wrecked our brains there, Daniel. Like we're not up here. Like sorry, I'm sure Ellen is, but I'm not.
My brain.
It's been a long day. So the sprinkler, Eric has come back. Is the team happier? Can be included in value. Oh, that's interesting.
I think that could happiness of the team be included in value? Well, first of all, let me clarify that I'm talking about, and in the book Discover to Deliver, product value.
Yeah.
Now, does a metric that could it's like a cause and effect question. A metric around team happiness can impact the business and customer value of the team, and it might be an important metric to keep track of. Okay, yeah. But I just want to separate what I'm intending and talking about in that book is the product value. does the team that create the product, their happiness matter? From my point of view, it does, but it's not the only thing that matters, right? So I just want to distinguish, product from process, kind of, I guess, is what, because the process of collaboration, how the team works together, will certainly influence the product's value. They're interconnected, product and process.
I think Ross needs to give me some coaching because I'm not a big believer in team happiness. Because just following on from was it Hackman's book, Richard Hackman's book on teams, all his research on that. Basically, what he was saying in his book was leading teams, that happiness comes from being focused on a common objective and treating that as almost like the common enemy, and together, even if we don't like each other, we kind of come together to kind of conquer this objective or goal or whatever we're trying to, and then happiness comes, kind of thing. I think it's good to have it as a secondary concern, but not necessarily as a primary concern. It's important, don't get me wrong. If I was to measure anything to do with teams, it'd be more to do with inspiration. I just haven't figured out a way to measure it.
Interesting.
How can you light up a team, So Ross, maybe you can sort me out, get me fixed.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a leading indicator of product value, but it's not necessary. You could have a happy team that's building crap, so
Exactly.
You're not going to be a team much longer.
Exactly. So. Yeah. Okay. So Angela has come back. I believe the value as desirability can be very subjective. How could the team best work on this? That's a really good question, Angela.
The value of desirability. So can be subjective. Well, I mean, I think maybe what you can look at is, it can be subjective. So I think what we need to be looking at in terms of metrics, though, is a combination of qualitative and quantitative metrics. I mean, you could do a customer survey to find their product happiness, how happy are they with their customer, but you could look more quantitatively at customer metrics such as reduced churn rate or sustained or increased retention, or reduced task completion time, reduced cancellation. I mean, those are indicators that are quantitative and your product is desirable. So, those are indicators that you could call outcome indicators, because they're changes in customer behavior that impact business results, right? So if you have higher retention, obviously your ROI is going to be better. If you have less churn, you have less expenses because you're not, you have less operational expenses in the product, you have less marketing you need, and so forth. So there is an aspect of desirability that's qualitative and that can be measured qualitatively, sort of NPS score or likability score, but there are certainly desirability measures that are quantitative in my take of it. I hope that makes sense, Angela.
That's fine, Angela. Thank you.
Is to identify what those are. You said, how does a team work on those? With good product leadership, we need to identify what are the outcomes that we're looking for, and maybe pick the one most important. Some people call that the North Star metric, and just work on that. Don't be a feature factory, work on that outcome metric or metrics, a couple of them.
So Ross, everyone's in great form tonight. Thank you, Ross. And Daniel was saying as well, he's given us a recommendation, the Beatles, Happiness is a Warm Gun.
We're not going to go Freudian here and take that any further than just...
Yeah. Angela, yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, great,
Angela. Eric, the sprinkler, impact mapping might be used. What do you think about impact mapping? Do you use it much?
I use it occasionally. Yeah, I use elements of it. So Goiko was who wrote a book on impact mapping. It was originally inspired by a Swedish a technique called concept mapping, I think it was, from a academic article. And that was the roots of impact mapping. And some of the elements that I really like about it is Goiko was heavily influenced by Tom Gill, who uses a metric, a quantifiable metric called language for planning language. Yeah. Planning language is a really great way to specify goals and turn them into quantifiable objectives. I could go a little bit into that, but anyway, without sidetracking that is a very root issue that I love about impact mapping. Let's focus on what that quantifiable outcome is, and then the role. So one of the things I like to do is think about combining the roles of the people who could make the impact toward that outcome using some very simple tools. Yeah, I like personas, proto-personas, and empathy maps and those things, but something also very simple is just a role map, where you lay out almost in a hierarchy. In UML days, it might have been called an actor map, what the different roles are, not job titles, but roles that need to interact in some way with the product or get some value from the product. And if you use roles there in the impact map, that's, I'm going like this because I'm thinking about objectives and then the roles and then the capabilities that they want. So I do like impact mapping. And I would also say one thing that to watch out for or to look for, that not all of the needs that our user community have, our customers have, need to be built. You have software built around them. Okay, you may have other solutions. So some of those, there's a tendency for people on an impact map to come up with things that are going to be stories or features. Be careful about that. You know, maybe it's help. Maybe it's sending them some other information. Maybe it's something completely non-automated that makes their life better, and that is actually part of the product when you think more holistically of the product. So that's a little trap to be careful about in impact mapping, but it's a great structure and a great sprinkler that it can be very useful.
Thank you very much, Eric. Okay, so I want to go back to the book and talk about structured conversations, if that's okay.
Yeah.
That seems to be a big feature of the book. So can you tell us a little bit more about structured conversations, Ellen?
Yeah, sure. It's a metaphor. Structured conversation is a metaphor for the ongoing collaborative way that we have good conversations. You know, in the Agile Manifesto, it talks about the value of face-to-face conversations. And we can have a lot of these conversations, but they don't necessarily have a good outcome, or their flow is not necessarily as productive as they could be. So a little bit of structure helps. And this is very similar to the classic expand, contract conversation. So in a structured conversation, you take some nugget, you know, you see that over on the left next to the word explore. That nugget might be a vision, it could be value, it could be a story, it could be an idea, and you explore options. So those boxes represent options, product options, which can be software, service, device, whatever they happen to be. And after looking at options, and you want to have a partnership involved in that so that you have diverse perspectives, of course. After you come up with these options, you use value as a slicing mechanism. And you subset the options into the ones that are most valuable. So that's the evaluate. So that means that entering a structured conversation, you have to be clear on who the partners are and what they value, and what's the next most valuable thing for us to focus on, because you can't have everything. And some of the values, some of the partners' values are more important than others. So what is the next most important thing? Yeah, we talk about all these options. Let's subset those options, and then let's confirm and make sure we have a shared understanding of them. We can do that through scenarios, through ATD, etc., to make examples, tests, and around the cycle we go. And as we'll talk about in a few minutes, I like to use the 7 product dimensions as we use this structured conversation. So it really is honoring the way we humans need to be able to have conversations that we need to get diverse ideas, get a plethora of them, within a context of whatever that box is. So you're not going wild. You do have some context for the conversation and a planning horizon in mind for the conversation. And we look in a diverse way at options and slice for value and make sure we're on the same page, that we can verify and validate what we think we're going to build. So it really is a metaphor.
Thank you. So it's kind of like diverge and merge kind of thing, is it?
It's the same pattern. In the book, the first book I wrote, Requirements by Collaboration, I found I think I have 11 collaboration patterns, and one of them is called expand and contract, because when you're working with groups, whether you put them in subgroups or you do it in the plenary, depending on the size, you need to get expanding ideas, and then you need to contract. And you need to have some clear way of contracting and narrowing, and that's where value comes in when it comes to product work.
We got a question from Daniel. So regarding structured conversation, do you know about the core protocols?
Yes, I am familiar with McCarthy core protocols. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Thank you. A couple of comments from Russ. Quite likes event storming. Have you used that, Ellen? Event storming?
Actually, I've used it without knowing what it was called using it. But yes, events. I've not specifically used event storming as in the last couple of years that it's gained popularity. But it's very similar to the structured conversation. And events are a way to look at the action dimension and looking at a thread of work through the product. So I would also want to bring into event storming the other product dimensions. But it's like event modeling in the business analysis world, where you're looking at business, temporal, or if you're dealing with a physical device, machine events.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And the Sprinkler, Eric has come back saying, what about liberating structures? I've used liberating structures a lot in the last couple of years. Since Harry and Christian Verweis have kind of introduced it to the Scrum Derog folks. Have you played around with them at all?
Yes, and they're great. And they're actually orthogonal to many of the techniques that I learned back in the day, originally through the International Association of Facilitators. It's really interesting because the guy that one of the authors, I can't remember, one of the two authors, I met him maybe about 5 years ago in Boston, and he was talking about liberating structures. Yeah. Maybe it's longer than that because I've been in the Boston area for 10 years. So whatever. Some time ago, he came there and met him, and we used one of the structures. And I said to him, this stuff is basically the same. Some of the names are different. The names you have are in liberating structures. I love the names. They're very catchy. Yeah. The visual images are catchy. So from a marketing point of view, in terms of using the techniques, it's awesome. And I was telling you about the International Association of Facilitators and all the different methods, and they have a method library. And he didn't actually, at that time, know about the IAF. And there's this huge community of people. So they sort of grew up separately.
Yeah,
they grew up separately, but they're wonderful. They're wonderful.
Yeah, they're really good. Anytime I do liberating structures, they make me look much better than I really am. So I'm very grateful to the guys who invented them.
Yes.
So just a couple, so Russ said indeed, thanks. So we're going to go back to the book, and we're going to get into a little bit of detail because we want to talk about the 7 product dimensions.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about those 7 dimensions on page 89 of the book?
Sure. Well, what I found is that working with a diverse set of products in different domains, that there's sort of these universal dimensions to products. And that's what the 7 product dimensions are. And one of the things that I found, let's say almost toxic in the world of product requirements is this idea of functional and non-functional requirements. And it's such a canard. It's very deceiving. It's old school because that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what we want to look at is every product has a combination of these dimensions. So the user is the person or device that interacts with the person, thing, or device that interacts with the product. Doesn't always have to be human. You have interfaces, how that user connects to the product. The action this is the thing that we think of the most and easiest, because this is the tasks and the behavior, the capabilities, and notice the physical image that we use is a footprint, right? Because it's action. So we assigned a visual image to each of these dimensions. Data is the repository of information that the product stores. So that's your data at rest. That's your databases, your tables. The information that is acted on. Right? But you can't act on data without having control or rules, policies that must be enforced. Otherwise, that data will be wrong, and the actions will be misleading. And the product lives in some environment. So the environment is basically the hardware and software platforms and standards that the product must conform to. And you'll notice that the image for that is you have a product image in a vise, because it's constraining the product, right? And that stuff is mostly already defined for many organizations that are large because they have a technical architecture. Right? And then we come to quality attributes. Quality attributes, to me, I describe them as the last child in the playground to get picked.
Yeah, it's like that's what they're great.
Yeah, we forget them, but they are incredibly important. So these are the properties that qualify operation or development. And some people call them ilities, but not all of them end in ility. Security, usability, availability, testability, performance, etc. And I have a meta model in the book, a model of the different quality attributes.
So that 17 of them, I think is that right?
I think so, 17 of them. But you can have, when we do training and coaching around this, you can find that you could have custom quality attributes depending on your product, right? Yeah. So one organization I worked with, which was in mailing and communications, they had deliverability as a quality attribute, right? That was important. The thing about quality attributes is that what we fail to do too much, Agile or otherwise, is make them testable, make them quantifiable. And then you have to decide as you build the product and you identify quality attributes, there's trade-offs. You can't have them all. So a product person has to sometimes make tough choices between, say, performance or response time and security, for example. So there are trade-offs between these, and we may have to, we want to understand sort of the metrics, that a slider of metrics that was acceptable and not acceptable when it comes to making those quantifiable. But yeah, so there's 7 product dimensions, and if you want to be, get into the N and the F words, non-functional and functional, you could say that the functional are the user, action, data, and control, those 4. Yeah. And you could say the non-functional are interface, environment, and quality attribute. But it doesn't matter. As long as you explore, this is where you use the structured conversation, you explore options across and within each one of them, so you don't miss anything.
Okay, so basically what you're doing is you're providing a kind of a template that allows you to ask questions to find gaps in your thinking, right? And
find gaps and possibilities that you might not have thought of before.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it, actually. And also on the same page, you refer to the now view, the preview, and the big view.
Yeah.
And like I saw somewhere else as well. I think I saw somewhere else that you'll find that on page 79 as well if you want to check that out. But is that referring to like now 2 + 1 is 2 + years? Is that the match, or?
It could be, John, but your mileage will vary depending on,
right.
Are you scrummy? Are you a flowy? How quickly are you doing continuous integration? So your time horizons will vary. So that's why I kept it neutral, and I tried to keep it independent of any methodology.
Yeah.
I've just for many years used now pretty big. There's some people talk about now, next, later. It's the same thing. That's just is how I've referred to it. And it's like, when you're when you're having these structured conversations and you're using the 7 product dimensions, you need to have an anchor of what planning horizon am I thinking about for having this conversation. Because if I'm having the conversation at the big view and I'm in the data talking about data, I'm going to be talking about big chunky things like customer, for example, which is a big thing, or an invoice, or a asset, or an assay. Whereas if I'm at the now view, that same data dimension, the conversation is going to be down to an attribute level, right?
Yeah.
For a particular action that might be needed, or a particular rule that's being enforced. So it gives you an anchor for how broad the conversation is going to be. So I just find it's a small but important thing is, okay, what's the planning horizon we're talking about for this feature, story, vision, product, and then you need to facilitate the conversation to keep it at that level, so you're not jumping down into anal retentive glory when you need to be at a higher level of a conversation.
I do something very similar, Ellen. I used the planet as a metaphor, and I talk about what are we going to achieve in the next 3 months. And I use the metaphor of if we're on Earth, planet Earth, getting into orbit. So getting into orbit, what we do in the next 3 months, and then getting to the moon in like a year, 1 to 3 years, or like 2+ years in your model. And then from Basvada inspired, what's the almost impossible perfection vision, like getting to Mars for me? It's not like very unlikely. So it's kind of nice because, go ahead.
It's earthy. I like that. I've also used the analogy with now pre and big as being big view being boulders, preview being rocks, now view being pebbles.
Yeah.
We're both on the same Earth theme, I can see. Earth and beyond.
Because you might have Elon Musk in the room, and he might want to land anywhere on Earth within 1 hour. So okay, that's like almost impossible. Like let's put that in that vision. But like, what can we do in the next 3 months, kind of thing? You know what I mean? And what can we do in the next year? So it's great to help people kind of relate to what they're doing. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
There's a few comments coming in. So let's just check in. So Daniel's loving the dimensions. Yeah, me too. Eric Le Sprinkler. I can imagine a backlog refinement session addressing explicitly the 7 dimensions. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's absolutely what you do. So we put this stuff on what we call a discovery board, and there's examples of it on the Discovery Deliver site, and you can download some assets to build your own board. We've built a discovery board in Mural for training purposes, and perhaps one day we'll get that as a template. But we put that on the board so that we could see what those options are during refinement, and then star or mark off the high value ones. And then we assemble those into a chunk of work, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have to be a story. But we've had a conversation where everybody understands holistically, because we've talked about the dimensions, what all the parts are, so we can build our tests and go.
Work available. I just put the URL there for everyone, discoverytodeliver.com/samples.php, and you'll find loads of templates there. There's some constraints about how you use them, so read the T's and C's.
Yeah, no, thanks for checking that. No, this is all under Creative Commons, so we would just ask you to share and keep the Creative Commons information there. But you can see on the first row, second item, you can download the Discovery Board Kit, or you can just print them out individually. The images down below of the 7 dimensions, all 7 of them are there. Yeah. And these are some of the other images from the book, and you are welcome, and I hope you will make use of them.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for making those available. And we're going to see some other free toys as well later on, so there's more to come. Going back to some of the comments. Russ has to leave now. Thank you both. Thank you, Russ.
Thanks for joining.
And Eric LeSprinkler is going to try it tomorrow. I've got a lot of refinement sessions coming up as well. Actually, my context is non-tech, Ellen. Have you ever used these techniques in non-tech, or if you have it, like, what do you think there'd be any kind of? Do you think you could use it? Basically, is what I'm wondering.
The 7 dimensions, yes, absolutely. Because you could use this as a service. You could use it. I mean, Mary and I use this when we flip the book from physical to put it on a virtual platform, and we use the 7 product dimensions as well. So we found them to be universal. I mean, I principally use them for product work, but yes.
It's unprofitable. It's just not technical. It's not software. It's like other stuff. You know what I mean? So
exactly, it's neutral technology.
Okay. Good. Daniel's come back with a comment. Sometimes the requirement is hard to distinguish from non-functional. I think that's probably where you were going, Ellen, as well.
Yeah, I think that's, I do an exercise in our backlog refinement. We have a course called Vision to Value Backlog Refinement Practitioner. We do an exercise where we take some text requirements and we ask people to sort them into functional and non-functional. And it's really hard for people to do. And sometimes they put things in the middle because they cross over, which is kind of Daniel's point, is you don't have security unless you do take some action to enforce that security, right? For example, is a very simple example. The point is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you sort it or put it in a functional bucket or a non-functional bucket, as long as you've got all the dimensions, which cross functional and non-functional, if you will, according to IEEE definitions of those terms, then you're okay. So it's not a case for getting rid of those requirement spec documents, which have been so harmful over the years, caused so many problems.
Yeah, there was something else. There was lots of lovely nuggets that I noticed in your book, and there's one I'm going to just bring to your attention now. It's to do with looking for page 125, but I'm not sure if I'm finding it in the right place. Yeah, this is it actually. Just to do with wants, needs, and requirements.
Yeah.
You seem to tie it to the big view, preview, now view. I thought that was nice.
Yeah, this gets into the idea of options, or I think it was Daniel was talking before, things that you don't do, the never kind of things. Because we kind of think of the backlog as here's all the stuff that we want to do. But no, the backlog is just a set of unvalidated product options. They're just possibilities. They're unvalidated product options. So, when I wrote the memory jogger book and thought about functional and non-functional, and since moved off of that and thought about requirements, well, something's not really required unless it really is needed. It really is a requirement. If it's some chunky feature or chunky story or whatever, epic, whatever terminology in the backlog, it's something you think you want, but you're really not sure unless you've validated it. You have some evidence that it's necessary, and then you need it. And then even when at that middle level, the preview planning horizon, when you're looking at, this is what I need, but you still don't know the shape and form and acceptance criteria for it, and you may not need all of that rock. You only need some of the pebbles. So it really is not a now view thing until it can be very, very clearly specified, which is where really good acceptance criteria specification comes in, having had those 7 product dimension conversations.
Thank you. And I noticed something else as well. It was, and it's particularly relevant, it was page 184 about structured conversations, co-located versus distributed teams.
Mm-hmm.
A bit more nuanced than that. It was, I'll just bring it up here. So you talked about the formality and informality, the frequency and infrequency of people getting together, depending on whether you had a co-located team with rich domain knowledge, newer innovative product with high cost of delay, kind of versus a distributed team on a complex product with some domain knowledge. How have you, reflecting back now, because we've had a few months of the pandemic crisis, have your perspectives changed in any way in terms of what we've got on this page here, page 184, about those sliders, and you ask people to consider those scenarios?
Um, Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think we have some decent tools now since that book was published to make to slide at the first row where the formality needs to be higher. I think it could go maybe a little bit toward the middle. I myself have been working with teams using Mural. And but there is some degree of formality there, right? Because I've got some structure here. I've got the 7 dimensions, the discovery board. So that's sort of framework we're working. And we need to have frequent conversations. I think maybe I'd also move that scope item to the left a little bit as well. But other than that, yeah. I mean, we need to use tools. We need to turn our cameras on. We need to have really well facilitated conversations. Okay, much more. So the facilitation skills, either within the team or the coach or scrum master, if you will, or some of the team members, they need to build some bench strength in that way. And now, just sort of not pushing aside, but putting aside the conversation about product stuff, thinking about teams, this is where, particularly when teams have had to shift very quickly into a fully distributed mode, first of all, there's some equalness about that, which is goodness, right? Versus having some people on site and some people distributed. And I believe there's some research, I can't point to it, but that I've heard about, that says it's, if they're all distributed or all on site, the productivity level is pretty good, but if it's split, it's not a good experience. So now we're all split in a distributed mode. It might require a team to reset its working agreements or to rethink doing something like a liftoff. Some of the folks listening to this, either real time or later, might be familiar with Ainsley Nee's and Diana Larson's book called Liftoff. And that is a really powerful set of rituals. That's a facilitated event that gets the team on the same page, whether or not you are, just starting up a new team. It can be a team that's in a different situation, like, okay, we all had to go distributed because of the pandemic. Or the team, we recognize we're not working as well as we could. So we need to take a look at our purpose, our context, and how we're working together as a group, and reset how we're going to do conversations and expectations of each other. And when are you going to get back to me? And how do I make notes on the Mural or Miro board? What's the best way to have conversations? When do you want to see this or that? Those are part of the working agreement, but also, are we very clear on what the vision for the product is and what our mission is for the team and how we measure that? So this kind of team stuff that we're talking about. Yeah?
So the sprinkler, Eric has a question. What's co-located? What do you mean by that?
I meant that we're physically located. We're physically in the same physical location. You could be. That's what I meant. Physical location.
Yeah, that's what I understood, actually. And then just to follow up then, so when we talk about structured conversations, not so much talking about whether it's co-located, but more to do with the structure for the conversation. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is when it's like traditional versus time boxed versus flow. Where do these conversations need to kick in?
Well, yeah, that's the only difference is the timing of it. Like if I'm using a flow model, a Kanban model, and my WIP limit just went down for waiting for analysis or refinement or preparation, getting an item ready, then that's when I pull it in. So it'd be more on demand. Whereas if you're using more of a Scrum model, some of the teams will have a schedule for doing refinement conversations and having a structured conversation during refinement. So it may be more scheduled versus on demand. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's thunder and lightning in the background.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting. Yeah. So here's an example, I think, where you've got kind of like sprints, if you like, right? So you're saying that, yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. And then you have a
conversation that's going right now for the next sprint or for 2 sprints ahead, on a schedule.
Yeah. Okay. So like during the sprint, I guess a lot of that would be around product backlog refinement, right?
Right. You're working ahead for the next sprint or 2 sprints ahead, for example, and you could have mini conversations. We like to do it at a discovery board on an item that maybe you weren't as clear with before you came into the sprint.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not so much the case, but you're still going to be able to make use of the structured conversation. And the other thing that I want to emphasize about that is you want to rely on, with the 7 dimensions, as much as possible, use visual models. So somebody mentioned before event storming, right? Or a story map for the action dimension.
Yeah, I love story maps. Yeah.
Data model, or list of events, event response, or for interface, context diagram. And you can work off of those models. You don't have to write all these words out. So particularly for those dimensions that lend themselves to visual models, absolutely use visual models. That increases learning and retention.
Thank you. And for those people who are into flow, here's another example with flow. So there's a kind of a Kanban board going on there. And I guess there's probably some kind of what they call in TameFlow, some kind of full kitting where you're lining up your ducks, but you're also having those good conversations with your partners to figure out what you really, really want and ensure you really want this kind of thing next. And then I guess you're expecting those conversations to be ongoing as you're teasing out, refining, right-sizing that work.
Right.
But there's kind of less structure there because it's more about flow. Forgive the pun, yeah. Yeah. Okay, and there's a few comments coming in now, so I'll just check in here. So Eric is saying shorter meetings, and he's having a bit of a laugh about that. He said that's a joke. And Daniel is really enjoying this talk. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you for being so engaged. I appreciate that. I hope that wasn't a joke. So okay. So I wanted to ask you about MVP, if that's okay, because I noticed a few times, Ellen, that you mentioned the term MMF, minimum marketable feature. And my understanding was that a minimum marketable feature is like a feature that has value for some kind of customer or end user. And for you, a minimum viable product is like a superset of that. You could have a number of features within a minimum viable product.
Right. That's how I think from a granularity point of view.
Yeah. Do you find people kind of getting lost when you use terms like that?
I mean, at the time when we wrote the book, we used MMF. I really like that concept of MMF. And it came from a book called, I actually look it up in my index because I'm not thinking of it at the top of my mind, but it came from a book that really is about accounting. Yeah, it's called Software by Number. Software by Number by Dene and Cleland Hong, 2003. Software by Numbers, Low Risk, High Return Development. And they were working at HP, and it really is an accounting book. And I really like that concept about thinking about return on features and only selecting the most valuable features within an overall product.
Yeah.
So thing is that MVP, MMF, MLP, minimum lovable product, those terms unfortunately have become overloaded. We were talking just like product owner has become overloaded. Yeah. And so I tend actually these days, I tend to not even use those. I mean, if you think about the original idea of an MVP and customer development, the Eric Ries's ideas from customer development was really a full product in lean, product that you would think you were building in a lean startup mode. And it's sort of, I've gone to organizations that call an MVP something that they're building is in a giant feature for a release. So it's really been misunderstood. I think unintentionally, good intent is that, yeah, we need to slice things down. We need to maybe not be a feature factory and just build everything that somebody says to build. So I try to shy away these days from anchoring on, in Epic's another one. That's a term that I personally dislike because there's so much misunderstanding about that term epic. What is it? When does it start? When does it end? Which planning horizon is it for? Your mileage varies. I've seen such variety in that in organizations.
Yeah, so. Yeah. And I want to talk about some samples you had in the book. The time is flying. We're talking for an hour and 45 minutes already. So I'm not going to shut it down. Don't worry. We just want to make sure that we cover the main points in the next 15 minutes. So I want to just show up some samples. These are from your website. And there's samples there. I actually showed the wrong thing earlier, I think, to show the wrong link to show the templates. But they're just discover2delivery.com resources. You'll find a sub-menu and you'll find all of these things that we've been talking about this evening. And I guess what I want to ask you, Ellen, is like, if you were to pick a photograph here that kind of summarizes the work that you do, which one would it be?
Oh my God, I have to pick one of them.
Yeah.
Summarizes it. They're all pictures of in the background of the discovery board. I guess the ones where the one where you see multiple people at the board at the same time. So maybe second row, first one, or third row, the rightmost one, where you break people up. Again, this is where we are physically in the same location. You can simulate this in a virtual mode. People would be working in smaller groups, affinity groups, cross-affinity groups, ideally, on optioning, using the structured conversation to come up with options and get assigned one or more of the dimensions. And so they would do their work, and then we would do their work in that dimension, or maybe they'd get two of them. And then we come together in a plenary. So this is sort of an expand, contract model from a collaboration point of view. Actually, the model, I call it divide, conquer, correct, and collect and correct. Divide, conquer, correct, collect. And come together in a plenary, learn and cross-check what each other came up with. And then maybe we do some correction and go back, and then we reach closure and we understand what that item really is about and the value that it has. So those would be, I'd have to pick two. Sorry, John.
Yeah, that's okay. I quite like the one in the middle. I don't know why, because the people weren't in the way, so I could see everything. You had your vision with your goals, objectives, benefits,
and then to the right, you can't see all the dimensions. You only see, I think, two of them. Yeah. They're in the interface, but the rest of them are there. I mean, I actually, when I'm working with teams, I show them pictures like this so they can understand what it looks like in practice. And the other thing to just mention is, even though when you read the book, there's a sequence to how we presented the dimensions, user, interface, etc. That doesn't, and how it's shown on the assets section, you get this little lineup of them, call that the lineup diagram. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the order that you're going to have the conversations. So this is where you need to think about the domain and what is the best dimension or dimensions to put your foot forward with, to start with, to have better conversations. And we did put in the book, in this section that is a concept section, for each dimension, we give you when to lead with that dimension. So there's a little paragraph that's hard won. Like it's just a small paragraph, and let me tell you, there's a lot of that went behind that, because there's a hard-won experience working with a variety of domains of when it was better to start with this versus that dimension. But the beauty of it is, if you start with one and it doesn't resonate, you just stop and pick up another one. Okay. Yeah. So as a facilitator, it's a good idea to think about, okay, which dimension or dimensions do I want to start with this conversation? Is this domain, to me, a product domain has I call it a smell. It has a smell. Is this more about data and rules? Is this very action-oriented? Is this about performance-related stuff? So it's quality attribute. They have a smell. So if it's a very action-oriented domain, events and a story map, in the action dimension are really great. But if you're doing algorithms and making decisions and data analysis, data and rules, a story map's not going to be a good model to begin with to get to the 7 dimensions. So you have to be mindful of what fits for that particular product domain as a way to start the conversation. You don't want to skip any of the dimensions. You may only spend 5 minutes on one of them, but
at least think about it. Be conscious about whether you're going to cover it or not. Yeah. Thank you. And the other thing I noticed as well, very late in the book, it was page 231. I was delighted to see that you were referring to examples, even when then statements. So I just want to share that on the screen. So hopefully the viewers can see this as well. They've got the free download of the book at discover2deliver.com download. And so here you give an example of a story where you're kind of using given, when, then for the acceptance criteria, if I'm understanding correctly. Is that right? Yeah, and part of the point also is that BDD given, when, then is not covering all your dimensions, covering 4 of the dimensions, but it's not covering the ones that are non-functional, if I can use that. So it's covering our user, it's covering our action, our data, and our rule, but we're not doing any testing around quality attribute or the usage of the environment or the interface. So it is definitely a very powerful way to start a conversation. It's start with, I love examples, for example, a scenario, and it starts with an example. It starts with a case study of the book, doesn't it?
What's that?
The whole book starts with a case study of Squeaky Clean, isn't that right?
Yes, it does.
Into a workshop conversations. Very good. Yeah,
some people don't like those, and we couldn't figure out, do we put it at the beginning, in the middle, or whatever? Yeah. We ended up starting telling the story. But as Brian Merrick said, an example would be handy right about now. So they are really, really golden, those examples.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big proponent of using examples. And in fact, you could take these scenarios. Examples are more detailed or specific version of a scenario. You could take a scenario. Scenarios are a form of action, for the most part. And you could list those and say which scenarios are highest value. When you really think about it, a scenario is triggered by an event. So for those people that are familiar with event storming, it's really a form of action. So all these things are connected. And, so then the other connection thing, John, you brought, before we got together, you were talking about the table that I have in the book that shows a given dimension and questions you asked.
You have to guess them now. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another really key point is that you're not, even though you may have a conversation around action, that action needs data. That action needs rules. It's going to live in an environment. It's going to be triggered by a user. It's going to require interface. I guess the point I'm making is I have like a mental model when I'm at a discovery board that those dimensions, which have different colors, are like threads. And you're weaving a tapestry. You're pulling one thread, takes you to another dimension's thread, which then pulls you another color, so that you have this tapestry that you're painting. Because every dimension connects in some way to another dimension, or leads you to questions to another dimension. And I've found that it's been just an elegantly powerful way to think about the 7 dimensions.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have to turn my head sideways to look at it because it kind of goes the other way. So I've just put the page number for everyone, page 178, 179, where basically what you see is the 7 product dimensions across the top, and then you see them going down as well, and you match them. It's like a matrix, basically, and you'll see the relationships.
I'll send you a PDF of that you could put on the website. That's
Brilliant.
not.
Thank you. Yeah. Brilliant. Just a few more comments because I want to go to your blog next, if that's okay. Some really interesting blogs there. So Le Sprinkler Eric saying MVP could be a rumor, not MMFs. Yeah, MMFs are a bit more crystallized, I think. I would agree. So Ellen from Daniel, I will discuss inherent simplicity from Dr. Goldratt on September the 1st.
Okay.
Because we're going to talk about throughput accounting.
Is that on here? Are you?
Yeah, it's going to be here. Okay. Sorry, the poor audience will have to listen to me again. Russell will be making a fortune coaching me, I think. So we're looking at throughput accounting on the 1st of September with Daniel Duran.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so check that out.
Forward to that.
Yeah, I am too, actually, because when we look at funding models, you hear about zero-based budgeting, value-based budgeting, beyond budgeting, which is really beyond. It's actually beyond budgeting. It's management principles and throughput accounting. So I'm curious.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what else is there? So all in the room collaborating. I miss those days. Yeah, me too. It's funny. Simple little things, but if you have met the people before, it's probably a bit easier. But if you're new in a company and you've just been working with them online, it is much more difficult to acquire trust. It takes a lot more energy, a lot more time. And it's still worth the occasional visit, but we have to be obviously very careful and make sure people don't get sick and all that kind of stuff. Daniel has to go. Thank you, Daniel, for watching.
Thanks for joining and your comments.
Yeah, thank you indeed. And Eric is saying, indeed, Gherkins created great conversations. Yeah, the Gherkins groups, yeah. Seb Rose has a fabulous course on Cucumber, BDD, or specification by example, or automated test-driven development, whichever way you want to look at it.
Right.
Causal, of course. Okay, so I want to bring people's attention to a few key, because I said there were a few more toys that we had. I don't think we have time to talk about product management versus product owner versus product champion. But what I'll do is I will leave the link. I'll leave it in the description of the YouTube video afterwards. If you get a few minutes at the end, we might come back to it. But we could be talking for forever about that, couldn't we, Ellen?
Yes. You could link to the 2-part blog I wrote. There you go. Am I a product manager or a product owner? Yeah. And
I'm in our product champion, because I noticed that when I read it, I noticed your product champion in there.
Yeah, that didn't catch on. So product person is what I prefer.
Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple of other things in there. So one of them is, I'm familiar with the Lean Canvas, the business model canvas. Lots of canvases is like a canvas for everything these days.
Yeah.
But you've come up with a very good one. And essentially what you've done, I think you've made some amendments to the main canvas. There are some differences for sure. I still see revenue streams, cost, channels, partners, customer, value. I think I don't remember seeing value in the original one. Product, partner, technology. I haven't seen that. We got value. We got value in twice. Oh,
So it's value partner, but we haven't discovered. Right.
Yeah,
So you're looking holistically at the partnership.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then you've got competitive leader landscape and innovation waves. Tell me more about innovation waves. What's all that about?
Well, as a product person, I want to look out in the space of my market and the technologies that I use and what might be coming down the pike that would provide new ways of using the product. It may or may not result in new features for the product. It may be competition for the product. And what we found is that when product people start looking at these innovation waves, they realize that that's really not just, but it's extending and enhancing the life of the product as opposed to being a separate product by itself. So that's one of the pitfalls, is that product people would sometimes, particularly if they're inside out versus outside in, they'll sometimes see a new innovation and say, oh, that's a new product. But really, just think about like cloud computing or database storage, right? Having on-premise or physical storage versus going to the cloud, that's really an evolution and innovation to the storage product, okay? So thinking more broadly and holistically, we're extending the life cycle of the product, and that's important. That's important for me to think about as a product person. Do I need to do some experiments with some of these innovation waves? So that's what that block is about.
And on the back of the canvas, like page 2, you've got the 7 dimensions then.
Right.
And we're giving some hints in here as well about what you might want to do. So I noticed in the book that you use a lot of context diagrams
for the interface dimension.
Yeah. I noticed that a lot. So that's really cool. So it's like a new 2-page product canvas. So thank you for
this one is an example, but we will have the download. You can download.
You can download here. Yeah, and you explain here as well that the canvas leads to the roadmap, which leads to the backlog.
Right, and feeds in the roadmap can feed your understanding of the canvas. In multiple directions. So it provides some context.
Yeah, and would you argue that the product backlog is the roadmap, that it's just a different visualization of the same information?
Not really. Again, I think of the roadmap as unvalidated product options. They may or may not be things that you build in the roadmap. We may put them, if it's an upcoming planning horizon that's on our roadmap, and we have some outcome that we've defined, we may say, okay, to get to that customer outcome that we're looking for, we're going to provide this capability, and something goes into the backlog that may or may not get lifted to the top. Right. Yeah. So it's not a roadmap because we don't have a sense, well, indirectly we have a sense of time by the size of the item, assuming that you don't slice everything down. Which unfortunately teams do. Some teams have all these. I've never liked the image of the backlog that showed like a block with single lines all equal, as though they're all equal size. Right. You need to have, a healthy backlog is lean and lumpy. You don't have a lot of stuff in it, and items there that are big and chunky, because those are going to be in a future time horizon potentially, right? So it's going to be uneven, the sizing of the items.
And you've got another tool as well, which I'm going to use in a couple of weeks. It's called the matchup canvas.
Yes.
I'll give a backstory to this for the people who are watching. So if you've got a few teams starting at the same time, and you kind of want to figure out where a little kind of, how they can help each other in terms of, I'm good at this and someone else is good at that or whatever. Troy McGinnis has a wonderful spreadsheet on his website, focusedobjective.com. We can find a capability matrix. So basically what you do is you list off the skills that you might need across the product, and everybody scores themselves, how good they are, could they teach someone else or whatever. But then do they even want to do it? So they might be good, but maybe they don't want to do it anymore. And then it kind of forms a heat map, which is good. But I've also heard that something like what you've got is a little bit more intuitive, because it's almost like a market. So you're kind of saying, well, I can offer these skills, and it's kind of like, do you want to buy kind of thing? Is that the idea here?
Yeah, it's based on the idea that teamwork requires reciprocal interdependence. That you don't work independently, you work interdependently, and you have to rely on each other. So the idea is that I think there's an exercise that Lisa Atkins talked about in her Agile coaching book. It's maybe an extension of that idea, where you have offers and needs. And what we literally will do is we'll take this canvas, either print a version of this out, or we'll put it on big posters, and people will work on it on their own first. And if you see this block for I offer, these are the things that you can offer and depend on me for in the team. And down below it is, so I'm offering it, and I use that image of the hand. And then the saver, or lifesaver, like the water, right? This is what I need from others. And what we ask people to do is then, so they leave the right side off. The instructions are in the blog how to facilitate this in more detail. But we leave those two blocks off and ask people to walk around the room and sign up to help each other, or to receive help from other people. And that builds a relationship amongst the team for what they can understand, what they can depend on each other for. And I remember once doing this with the team, and almost everybody in the team signed up for the product manager's, her skills around the domain and understanding the market and all that. And she was actually quite overwhelmed because everybody was signing up for this help. And she was like, I need help with some things from you. And it opened up a very deep conversation in the team about how are they going to collaborate with her more effectively. And yeah, she had a lot of responsibilities to them, but she had to deal with the executives and the market and the sales folks, and what kind of help could the team provide to her. And it provided a way for the team to understand more broadly what the product manager's role was and how they might help her. So it can be a very powerful exercise for building, in a lift-off and building understanding.
Yeah. I think I kind of prefer this format to something I saw a couple of years ago, where they put like I'm buying and selling on a kind of a flip chart, and you kind of felt you had to go up to the flip chart, and I don't know, if you were an introvert, it wouldn't be very comfortable. I kind of like this. It's kind of put up on the wall. You could literally walk the walls then, couldn't you? And just
exactly. Yep, that's what we do. You walk the walls, you sign up. After you've done your part, everybody walks the walls, and then we pause and we go back. It is like a market of skills. I've seen that later. It is similar to that. However, it's more of making a commitment about interdependence in the team, and then being able to check on that later. Right? So, handy little tool.
Indeed, you're a fountain of knowledge, and you've got so many things you're giving the world, and thank you so much for that. And I'm going to use some of these canvases in the next couple of weeks, actually. So thank you. I can put some stuff into my Mura board now.
All right.
So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And there's a message here as well from Angela. We're going to wrap up shortly now. Angela's saying, thank you, Ellen, for sharing your wisdom. I've learned a lot tonight, and can't wait to read the book. Thank you, John, for the interview as well.
Yes.
So thank thank you everyone as well for being so engaged and giving us so many comments and giving us a bit of a laugh along the way as well. And there'll be probably 10 to 15 times more people watching afterwards. That's the usual way it works, Ellen. So I'll make sure that all the links are in the YouTube video and on Facebook as well, and on Twitter, so that people can access the resources that you discussed this evening. I want to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you so much.
You make it so easy and fun to talk to you. You're just great at this. I really appreciate what you do here.
It's just like a chat, isn't it? It was so relaxed. Thank you so much for being a good interviewee. I really appreciate that. Okay, Ellen, I'm going to leave you to it. There's a couple of final comments. The sprinkler saying thank you, Ellen and John. So we're going to wrap up now. So if you have any final comments, you can just send them in. Just really, really grateful. We have another show on the 1st of September, which is Tuesday. I'm trying to remember the time, but look up my YouTube channel. You'll see it'll be scheduled there anyway. Or on meetup.com, you can go to Lean Product Delivery or Lean UX London, or I think Less Meetup Baku as well, 3 meetup groups. So I think we're going to have some good numbers, and Ellen, delighted if you could join us on Tuesday if you get time, if it suits you. Time zone wise, it might not work, but hopefully you'll see the recording if you don't get to see it live.
Yes, absolutely. This is great.
Good. So over and out. Thank you very much. You can stay on here for a minute, Alan, but I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else. So thank you, and we will see you all on Tuesday.
Thank you. Stay